we have an ancient remains that's 13,000 years old. And so I kind of began to put two and two together, thinking, wow, wouldn't it be really neat if we could take a glimpse into the ancient past through the genome sequencing of this ancient individual?
Sarah decided to contact local Montana tribes to see if they would have objections similar to those voiced by Native Americans when scientists tried to recover DNA from the Kennewick man. The discovery of a 9,000-year-old skeleton in Kennewick, Washington, had triggered a contentious legal battle. Native Americans said the bones were sacred and should be reburied, while scientists wanted the knowledge their DNA could provide. The battle was ongoing when Sarah approached the Montana tribes asking to do DNA studies of the Clovis child.
One of the tribes was quite supportive and interested in my findings, and the second tribe, on the other hand, were not.
Sarah decided to go forward anyway, but she had never worked with ancient DNA, a far more difficult process than sequencing fresh DNA. So on her own time at a private lab, she began practicing on old animal bones and failed.
And so at that point, given the challenges and the obstacles and the heated debate with the Kennewick man, I just put everything aside and took a rest.
The hiatus would last 10 years. But in 2009, over in Copenhagen, DNA hunter Eske Villesjø, who had been so disappointed with the Skull Cave tooth results, was asked by Sarah to lead a new effort to recover the genome of what was now being called the Anzac child. The Copenhagen team, with Sarah joining in, went to work. Unlike the much older school sample, they were able to get strong DNA signals right away. They focused on recovering DNA from regions called haplogroups, strands of DNA sharing common mutation patterns that go deep into the past. They then compared Anzac's distinctive patterns to the genomes of nearly 150 modern populations around the world, and to a few ancient population samples previously decoded. It took the team 4 years, but they finally narrowed down exactly where the genes of the Anzac child had come from.
These findings were really significant. For one, that they refuted the Solutrean hypothesis, where the first Americans came across the Atlantic and they're European in descent. They're not.
As expected, major elements of the Anzac child's genome came from across the Pacific. 1/3 of the boy's genome matched genes from a 24,000-year-old Siberian skeleton. So he's part ancient Siberian. His other genes matched those of ancient East Asians. So 2/3 of his genome comes from them. But this specific genetic combination can no longer be found in any living populations west of the Bering Strait, only in living Native Americans east of the strait. So what does this mean?
So basically you can almost imagine, these two very distinct groups of people meeting each other, interacting, and you could say the child of the host, if you want, is actually, genetically speaking, Native Americans, right? And then the question was, when is this happening? Where is it happening?
What we believe is that there was a cross between Eastern Asians and Siberian up in the Bering Strait, and they crossed over the Bering Strait and populated the Americas.
So from the edge of the Asian continent, or from the now vanished land of Beringia, the ancestors of the Anzac child came to North America, bearing a genetic signature found nowhere else in the world. and would pass it to generations of Native Americans to come.
That would fit with the idea that you see Native Americans as being something genetically completely unique.
Back in Montana, Sarah and Eska were nervous about releasing the study's results, wondering what Native American reactions would be.
We didn't want to publish without some communication to the local tribes to tell them of our findings, because we didn't want them hearing about this for the first time through a publication.
They invited Crow historian Shane Doyle to the discovery site to assess his reaction to the study and their findings.
It feels really good.
We met him at the Anzac site, and he knew nothing about this, what we had found, and he became extremely emotional. And he took out his drum and he started playing a song.
I was really overwhelmed with emotion. The results show that American Indians are from America. We don't come from any place else. Nowhere else in the world is there Native American DNA except for the Americas.
But Shane told them the tribes would now want the child reburied.
We understand that the study's been made and we can't go back in time now. And so I think you should put the boy back. He's given us all this information, and now it's time to return the favor and put him back where his parents left him, where his grandparents shed tears for him, and it's just the right thing to do.
On a rainy fall day, representatives of various local tribes joined in the solemn ceremony to return this special child, their most ancient relative, to his original resting place. Initially, Sarah and Eska had misgivings about Shane's request to rebury remains that would be lost to science forever.
I had a huge conflict. I had a scientific community who was telling me how important this was. And then I also had the Native American communities who were also very passionate about seeing this child go back to his resting place.
It had been a long and emotional struggle for Sarah Anzac. But in the end, she did what she always knew she would.
From the first day that I set eyes on these remains, I had always felt like it had a story to tell, you know? And I just felt like it was important that this child had the chance to tell his story.
And as it turns out, the child called Anzac is far more significant than anyone could have imagined. Close to 80% of all living Native Americans carry his genome. And that percentage is even higher in Central and South America. This means the descendants of a single band of Ice Age hunter-gatherers who crossed the Bering Straits around 15,000 years ago would eventually create virtually all the great civilizations of North and South America that flowered long before European contact. By 5,000 years ago, there was just one frontier left for humans to conquer: the mighty Pacific. Almost 10,000 miles wide, the Pacific Ocean covers about a third of the Earth's surface. Its islands are like grains of sand scattered across a vast blue void. Yet somehow, early humans managed to reach them all.
These are distances that are greater than the distance across Europe. The whole settlement of the Pacific really is something that's under-celebrated and undervalued in terms of representing, you know, the capabilities of these people thousands of years ago. They did an amazing thing.
In the 18th century, when England's Captain Cook arrived in the Hawaiian Islands, he found people he called Polynesians had been there long before him. How was this possible? Cook needed navigational charts and full-masted ships to reach the middle of the Pacific, while Polynesians had less sophisticated-looking boats and sailed with no charts. So how did they reach specks of land in the middle of a 10,000-mile-wide ocean? Some experts believe the first people to reach Pacific Islands drifted on crude boats pushed by trade winds that blew west from South America. This theory of accidental drift originated with Thor Heyerdahl, a visionary Norwegian explorer. In 1947, Heyerdahl and a small crew set off from Peru to prove his theory. The men built a balsa wood craft called Kon-Tiki and just drifted westward on the currents. After 101 days, they crashed into a reef off a tiny island in the South Pacific. Luckily, no one drowned. It was an extraordinary adventure that embedded in the public imagination the idea that humans from South America settled the Pacific. But was Heyerdahl correct? Anxious to learn more about the famed explorer, Niobe traveled to Oslo to meet Heyerdahl's son.
Well, the funny thing with my father was that I'm myself a traditional academic. I'm trained to collect samples, data, analyze it, and draw conclusions from what I've found. My father, he jumped to the conclusion first. He was in many ways also an artist with imagination. He started with the conclusion and worked his way backwards, like a lawyer defending his suspect.